This is The Jewish Executive Project, a podcast that interviews inspiring and accomplished leaders in the world of business and entrepreneurship. Join veteran international businessman Mike Aaron and performance and leadership coach Rabbi Jacob Rupp, the executive director of Aish, Minnesota, as they discuss what it means to lead through the lens of Jewish values.
I'm thrilled to have on today a good friend of mine, John Ghermazian, who is the CEO of the Mall of America and also just an all-around wonderful rock star of the Minneapolis Jewish community. So we have quite a few very, very deep and profound ideas that come out from John's life, his teachings, the mentors that he's had in his life, his family, and I encourage you to listen with bated breath, as this is great. Thank you so much. John Ghermazian, dear friend and fellow Minnesotan, it's a pleasure to have you aboard here today. It's very funny because when people think, the staple of Minneapolis is the Mall of America. And when they think about this massive mall with all of the retail that there is, and it's like cutting edge, and it's like just crazy stuff. Mike, there's a you have an amusement park in the middle of the mall, every single trendy store, and then the guy that's running it is someone that looks like you'd see him in Borough Park or in a yeshiva, with the white shirt and the kippah. So what's that experience been like for you? You grew up in the yeshiva system. Tell me the transition and how being a teacher of Torah and a frum Jew has sort of played a role into your position running the Mall of America.
I think he's saying, talk about your dual personality.
Yes.
I guess it is a dual personality. Loaded question. For me, I guess I spent 12 years learning full-time, and I am really blessed. I was in Ner Israel in Baltimore for about 10 years of that, and I was very blessed in having guidance from people that I'm still in touch with today, my teachers and my rabbanim. And so for me, I never saw my evolution as a person as a contradiction to what I was going to eventually do in the future. And so being in the family that I'm in, thankfully, and the opportunities on the business side, I always felt that if I can grow in my Judaism in a way that naturally transitions into that role, then I'll be more prepared to do that. So for me, it wasn't like, okay, I'm done this, now I do this. I still consider myself a yeshiva guy, or I would say like a Torah scholar, but I happened to be, going into the office. So I guess I never had that mental shift that happened. It was a very gradual process, and it was deliberate. Like I almost knew 2 years in advance before I left the study. I actually started studying on my own because there's this interdependency on studying with a chavrusa, a study partner, and I knew that I'm not going to always have that luxury. So I actually took about 2 years of training myself to be able to study on my own, because I knew that was going to be a big part of it. I mean, my office bag, my kids still call it my Beit Midrash bag, which is my study hall bag, which is, it's ironic, but I love that that's what they call it. I mean, it doesn't have any books in there anymore, but so it's really, it's just trying to maintain that same mindset and knowing that that I do look different. Like I show up with, this might be a little bit more conservative than normal. I mean, you could wear a blue shirt or striped shirt, whatever you like. People ask me all the time, like I pretty much wear the same thing every day. And I just tell people that I became a member of a group of people with an ideology that I felt was important for me to bring to the rest of my life. And so I try to show up in the same way. When I worked in an oil company before I went to the mall business. So in Texas, I remember once one of the lawyers once asked me, just very respectfully, he's like, why do you dress like a penguin every day? It was an interesting question. But so was there more to that question?
It's quite interesting, Rabbi Rupp. I'm interested in your question, because one of the things that we proud as Jews, especially as observant Jews, is we see Judaism as a way of life. And we see every intention.
Uh-oh.
This is going great so far.
Did I freeze for a second?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's good.
Keep going.
No. So I think we see every aspect of our lives being intertwined and interlinked. And I sort of almost jokingly spoke about the two personalities, but the greatness of our religion and our traditions and our culture is that everything's entirely intertwined. So nothing that you said actually surprised me when you spoke about the intentionality on the continuation of that journey. And that's the greatness of our religion, unlike some other religions where you either in that block or you're in that block or you're in that part. We everything's interlinked, whether it's our business, our family, our community, our leadership, right? It just seems like it's natural for it to be interlinked.
Did you find, as you were making that transition into the working world, I guess was your first job out of full-time learning was in the oil company. Did you find that to be an intimidating switch, or was that something that just growing up in your family, you always saw people working, and it was, because I think to a certain extent, there is a perceived differential when it comes to the different paths of someone that's going to spend 12 years studying, learning at the deepest levels. You go out and teach, be a rabbi somewhere. And for you, it was not that direction. So did you find a certain level of, I guess, difficulty making that transition?
No, it's a good point you bring up. I tell you, I am as passionate as I am now as I was when I was studying full time and educating. I love teaching and I love inspiring and I love growing as a person myself. My choice and direction in life, I felt that because of the opportunity that I have to enter into what we would consider like mega business, I felt that whatever I could bring to the table was exponentially more impactful because I could be in that role. And so, although I haven't changed as a person, I'm still the same groggy person, and I wake up and I have, maybe not the best bedside manners when I'm tired, but when you're involved in something that is perceived as very important, then the message that you carry all of a sudden takes the same. I was once invited to speak at an event in Los Angeles. It was a big, large show called Netzach, and I gave. It's a Persian community because I'm Persian.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
I remember I gave this talk. It was really impassioned. It was I don't know. It was very intellectual. I don't know what it was. And so this lady walked over to me afterwards, and she's like, "Are you a rabbi?" So I said, "No, I'm a businessman." And then only after I said that, she's like, "Wow, that was a great speech."
That's so funny.
It was funny. And I hate to say that because, it's the same message. We're all saying the same thing. It's just that, people believe for some reason that if you have this environment around you that sort of speaks to how successful you are, even though I kind of like walked into this role, it's an incredible opportunity, but also incredible responsibility. So for me, it's exponential. Like I feel that, I love meeting with, young professionals and just talking to them. And then when they walk into my office and they're like surprised to see like this, like an observant Jew sitting there, and then lineup of people waiting up at my door to talk to me, and a lot going on. They're like, wow, this is incredible. Like you can do that. I'm like, well, yeah, why not? There's no contradiction. So I think, I really believe, and I tell this to people all the time. I mean, like I said, if you're in a position where you're perceived as being successful, even if it had nothing to do with you, or you're in an environment which is respected, then you have to know that people are going to look at you differently, and people are going to have a higher expectation of who you are and the way you can be perceived. And so, that's a responsibility, and you have to know if you're a Jew and you have a Masorah and a tradition which imbues you with that knowledge, you have a responsibility for people to see. Like I go into my office, I know there's different views on whether you wear a yarmulke in big meetings and stuff. but I can tell you the environment around me is different. Like I can't tell you how many times I'm in a meeting and someone will curse, or they'll say like a profanity, and then they'll look at me and they'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry."
Right.
Like I'm not the curse police. Like that's not one of the rules of the office. But it's like, to me, it's like, oh my gosh, like my presence here gives that notion that people feel that they have to talk differently. Now we don't set rules. We don't set rules about it, but it just reminds me how important it is, how we represent ourselves. I mean, if I'm
there's two interesting little questions I want to ask you. One's like a little example of what happened to me, and the other one is a question along the lines of what you spoke about. When I was living in Europe, I was in a meeting in London, and there was an investment project that I really wanted to be part of. There were a lot of bidders to be part of this project, and eventually I and my group were chosen to do it. As life will have it, it actually wasn't such a great deal, but at the time we all thought it was. Everybody did. And I once asked the guy behind us, non-Jewish guy, like, why did you choose our group? Because I would like to think we were the least favored. And he says, because I noticed before you put anything to your mouth, you were mumbling something to yourself. So I asked someone, what could he have been doing? And they said that he's making a blessing to thank his God for providing that sustenance. And he said, that's the guy who does business with me. So that was, and I've never forgotten that one. The other thing is, he has an interesting thing, what you're saying. You're talking about the responsibility, the profile of being from Jew in business, and how people expect a higher standard in all respects, right? So I had a conversation yesterday morning with a friend of mine, a business friend, let's call it, non-Jewish person, and he's negotiating with all his landlords during this time for rent deferrals or restructuring the leases as a result of the reality of today's world. And one of the landlords is a religious Jew. And he said to me, I was really disappointed in the deal that we're going to be doing. And I said, why is that? So he tells me, because I thought them being religious Jews, I would get a more gentle deal than other landlords. So I looked at him and I said to him, does that also mean, because you were so happy to have such an honorable landlord, in the good times you offered him more rent? And he said, well, it doesn't really work like that. So, and he couldn't see the faulty logic, right? But I thought I'd love to hear your comment and thought on that. Sometimes a religious Jew, when you have to make hard decisions, do you then have the dilemma, I hope this doesn't reflect badly on the Jewish people and only reflects badly on me? How do you deal with that quandary?
That's a good question. I mean, in this environment, with the challenges of businesses, so people are forced to make decisions that otherwise are not so popular, right? I guess the way I see it is try to avoid arbitrary decision making, so that people don't judge your character, but they judge the information that's making you, that's driving you to make those decisions.
Very good.
Because right, people can't argue with that. And then I think even when you make difficult decisions, you have to show compassion in that decision, right? And I've seen this, that even when people are disagreeing with you, if you show them that you genuinely care about what they're saying and that you're really receptive and understand what they're telling you, then even if you disagree afterwards, they're going to say, you know what, that's a kind person. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with the person, right? And we had, unfortunately, like just before this call, I got off a very difficult discussion on staffing and manpower. And so, I'm arguing that we need to be, stronger handed. And then, the person in the head of that division was arguing back and said something personal, like, something to the effect, well, these are my people, or something like that. And my response back was, that is the right answer that you just said. You should be thinking like that, right? We all play our different roles in terms of our responsibilities, but it doesn't mean that we lose focus on being compassionate. And it's not hard to be compassionate. There's books There's books on how to do it. So yeah, be data driven. So
I really like that one.
And be compassionate. Yeah.
I really like that one because being data driven in any negotiation, even in good times, always allow you to be comfortable with the position you have to take towards an outcome in the negotiation. Whereas if you're using more the art than the science, I think that's when the traditional emotions of fear and greed can come into play, you know?
Yeah.
But data driven, that's very valuable.
I would add another piece to it is, we often don't realize how passive aggressive we are. And we think that we're being nice when we're not straight with people and not giving them clear, definitive information, because we're afraid of how it'll make us feel, and we're afraid about the reactions that people will get. And so we go through this really uncomfortable sort of passive aggressive, non-clear directive information where people are almost feel like they need to figure out exactly what we're trying to tell them and when and how. Like I believe so much passive aggressive communication is masked in this pretend kindness, when really it's just a weakness that we have in being clear with people. So
my kind of guy, Rabbi Rapp and I have spoken about this before. People talk about, I'm conflict averse. So I say to them, what does that mean? Conflict averse to me means that if you're going in the supermarket and someone bumps your trolley hard, you don't get angry. That's conflict averse. But if you're in a work or business environment and you're paying someone fairly, you're giving them all the result and they're not performing, and you don't do anything about that, that's not conflict averse. That's foolish. If you're being fair on both sides, as you say, don't be that passive aggressive is terrible, because it prolongs an outcome that shouldn't have to be prolonged. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm part of an executive leadership group that I was fortunate to attend. And one of the top advice during crisis management is being brutally honest with people, but also give people a sense of optimism for the future based on fact. Yeah. And so if you can kind of couch those two together, because if you only have one and not the other, it's lopsided. You need to be brutally honest with people, and then you need to lay out the reasons why people should be optimistic about where you're going to go. And people appreciate that more than anything else.
See a scholar, Rabbi Rapp.
It's great.
A scholar, data and facts. Be gentle, use data and facts to validate. There's nothing worse than giving people false optimism, especially in today's time.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you can do, yeah.
I wanted to pull out from you, if possible, a little bit about developing identity. I think that one of the big challenges that people face sometimes is that they over-represent or over-identify themselves, let's say with their balance sheet or their company or their position in a company, and they don't really know who they are. And just knowing what I know about you, it's your family story is like one of the great Canadian American business stories of immigrants, of hard work, of creating an empire of tzedakah, of charity. And then also it's amazing for you. One of the things, I grew up with my best friend being Persian, and how so many Persians came to the Western world and lost a lot of their traditional identity that they had in Iran. And not only did you not lose it, but you found it in a very real way. But then also very interesting is that you got very involved in the Ashkenazi world. So because and then the whole business side. So what's fascinating for me is you are such your own person, but at the same time, it feels like you've been surrounded by these icebergs of identity. And perhaps talk about how one could develop a healthy identity with oneself, and then kind of with the community that they're in.
Rabbi, why did you use the word icebergs? Icebergs gradually melt. Rather use mountains of identity.
Mountains, or yes, I'm thinking like the supernova analogy, right? Or
Turkey.
There's a lot there. There's no doubt who I am today is very much molded by the environment of my parents and my family as a whole. What is unique about my father, my father and his brothers were immigrants. They came to America when they were 16, 17 years old. Literally didn't have a penny to their name. and just really the American dream. They really worked their way through. But one thing that has always been through and through is this understanding that there's a greater guide in life. And if you know my father and my uncles, when they say the stories about their life, they talk about the miracles that happen, right? The same stories that you hear from others, they're always going to be talking about, can you believe at that moment what happened? And you know how this happened. And I mean, they got that from my grandmother, Alea Shalom, that she imbued them with this deep sense of faith that they had as children. I mean, my uncle, one of my uncles, when he was leaving the airport as a young child to come to America, my grandmother told him, he said, look, you're going to America, you're alone. I want you to take this Torah with you. And every day I want you to just read one line. And he looked at her and he says, and he's brilliant, this uncle of mine. He says, well, what's the point of one line? She says, promise me you will read from one side of the page to the other. And he looks at her and he says, okay, I promise you that's it. She's like, that's all I ask you. And he did it every day. Now, he happens to be a brilliant-minded person, and she in her infinite wisdom knew that he's going to have a lot of ups and downs in life. And every day he read one line. And then he started doing that for months. And it's like, well, I have no idea what I'm reading. Started reading the translation. And then started reading the commentary. And then started reading the Mefarshim. And eventually he was approached by somebody and he said, you know what? You should start learning Talmud. And I can tell you, I was sitting at a Shabbat meal a couple of years ago, and my uncle gets up in the middle of the meal and he makes a completion ceremony on the entire Talmud of Shas. And he says that he was inevitably the wisdom of my mother, who knew that life is going to bring a lot of different things in your way, but just make sure that you have consistent engagement in your learning, in your Judaism. And that, mind you, my family, we didn't grow up observant. Like we weren't, it was only, I mean, I was younger, but my parents, they made that transition. And what's unique about it is that, they were at the height of their business when they became more observant, which typically doesn't happen. It's usually
no, yeah. Right. You normally swap the real God for the God of money when you become successful, right? Not the other way around.
Right. So
it's amazing. So they showed the Hakarat Tov at the height of their success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just always been, it's always been that recognition. And like in our family, we have a very clear distinction, clear understanding that we have those that are in the business and those that are full-time in Torah scholars. And with respect to the family, we don't look at any less, because we understand that there's a deep and important relationship that exists within us. I mean, families who identify themselves with just their wealth, by definition, have no definition, right? Because money is not an object. Money is just, it exists in its potential. And so if I'm defined by something which has no definition, then I really, that's what happens. There's no world, there's no structure in who I am. There's no definition in who I am. When you have a value system, and I tell people that supersedes your business and your personal success, there's a value system. And I can tell you, I can tell you countless stories of how a value system overrode a monetary benefit. And in the short run, maybe it looked like we were losing out as a result of that, but in the long run, that overarching value is what keeps everyone together and in line with growth.
It's very interesting. Yesterday, I'm involved in a venture capital company in Canada, and I was interviewing a potential senior person, and I asked them all their questions. Then they asked me, I gave them a chance to ask me a question, and he said to me, tell me your best exit and your best investment. So I described my best exit. It was having the courage to cut my losses on a bad deal. And he's like, that's your best exit? I know some of your exits have been, thank God, successful. I said, that's my job. My job is to create success. I don't get overjoyed when I'm just doing my job. Then I have courage to cut my losses. That's my best exit. Then he says, okay, well, what's your best investment? I didn't really like the other answer. So I spoke about something, and I had Baruch Hashem, the ability to build a financial institution as a co-founder. And then he says, but what are the metrics? Tell me the financial metrics. I said, the financial metrics is that there are probably about 300 people who wake up every morning feeling proud to allow their families' futures to be dependent on a company that I co-founded. And they walk around with joy, and they believe that they can achieve their self-actualization in that entity. That's a great investment. Because if they each have 3 kids, that's 1,000 people. And then their neighbors and all that. And it's like, I don't like any of these answers, really. So I said to him, well, what were you hoping for? He says, give me some IRRs in absolute dollars. And I was so happy that I authentically and sincerely could give him the answer that you just said. I said that all of those means is a concept called currency. Currency changes hands. That means it's fluid. My currency is that which my creator values me upon. Not the stuff that changes human hands as quickly as it comes and it goes. And either he's going to be happy to take your job, or he's going to say, this is a psychiatric institution. I'm keeping way away from these people. But it's funny because that just happened to me yesterday morning. I could see he was like, I don't know about this guy, you know, but it's a beautiful thought that you
I'll tell you a quick story. I don't know how much time we have.
We have a half.
No time. Tell us the story.
Yeah. I don't know. My father, I think, is okay that I share the story. I've already said it publicly. So when we were becoming more observant, so in Canada, there was something called the Blue Laws, which still exists in some places in the U.S., which basically didn't allow for shopping on Sundays. And so really the only day you can go shopping on the weekend was on Saturday. And my mother was just not complaining, but was just sort of, uncomfortable with the fact that as we were becoming more observant, there wasn't a day to go shopping at West Edmonton Mall, which was in Canada, in Edmonton, where we grew up. And so my father looked at her and he says, well, you know what? Let me take care of that. She's like, what does he mean? He says, yeah, let me fix that. And so what he did was he went into West Edmonton Mall, which has, I think, about 800 retail shops in it. And he goes over to, I think it was maybe 100 of them. And he says, guys, this coming Sunday, I want you to open your stores. And they said, oh, Mr. Ghermazian, are you crazy? It's illegal. We're going to get fined. You'll get fined. It was basically a fine system. So he says, don't worry, you open and I'll pay your fines. And so they said, doesn't make any sense. Nobody goes shopping on Sundays. It's like, just open. So the first 100 open, and the police come out, they get wind of it, and they write tickets to everyone. So the next week, he calls them all back in, and then he calls in another 100 or 200 and says, not only do I want you to open, I want all the rest of you guys to open as well. And they're like, are you crazy? Do you understand how much this is going to cost you? He's like, just do it. And in the meantime, word starts getting out in the news that the shopping center is open on Sundays. And people were coming in droves because it was such an anomaly, because nobody ever went shopping on a Sunday. And then what he did is he called the other shopping centers in town and he says, you fools, do you realize how much opportunity you're missing? I would encourage you to open up your stores. And they all open. And so what you had is this domino effect now. And they were making their quota in terms of the fines at the time. But then what ended up happening, it was a trigger effect. In Toronto, they started opening, in Vancouver, and then literally the entire Canada market opened up on Sundays. Originally, it was because of a religious value, but at that time, it had become so there wasn't really a rationale to it any longer. And what ended up happening is that it became such a major event in Canadian politics that they would have had to open another branch of the government to be able to process all of the fines. And they literally overturned the law of the Blue Laws in Canada. And so I remember telling my mom once, I'm like, do you realize that because of Shabbat and because of how the honor of Shabbat, we could have thought that we were losing out, but there's no question that the project was more successful because we've just gained the most valuable day of shopping. But think about how much opportunity was created in the world, and how many more people are not going to be having to go and shopping on Shabbat. My father claims that if you look at the timeline, the United States blue laws turning over was also at around. So he feels responsible for.
Well, I am going to disagree with you, Rabbi. I don't think it was because of a religious value. I think it was because of shalom bayis. Father wanted to keep your mother happy, right?
That's right. Happy wife, happy life.
Tell us about your family. I don't know much about, just about how you, as a busy father and with all these obligations, and how you the balance.
Yeah, I have a wonderful family, thank God. My wife, I have 6 kids. Baruch Hashem, bli and hara. What's interesting about COVID is that I would have never in a million years thought I would be able to spend as much time as I do home. I regularly leave home at around 6 o'clock in the morning to go to the prayers in the morning, and then I would immediately go to the kollel, which is the local study hall, and then study. I have a study partner for a couple hours in the morning, and then I would go straight to the office, and then only get home at dinner. So I'm leaving very early in the morning, and for probably the last 10, 15 years of my life, I have no idea what happens in the morning. To the credit of my wife, it's incredible sacrifice she's made that I've pretty much been MIA, because she knew how important starting my, the day off with my study. And so, I've lived a large segment of my kids' lives not home. And I had no idea what that looked like, but literally for the last 5 or 6 months, 4 or 5 months, I've been home. Our office, we're advising our people not to come back into the office, but work remotely. And this has been an incredible opportunity for me to, I think, really, first of all, appreciate much more of the dynamic that takes place at home. We do know about it because we might hear about it after our days and professionally, but I think a much, much deeper appreciation for how little I have to do with how my family might have any sense of health religiously and emotionally, to my wife's credit. And but making sure to try to keep my schedule as much as possible in uncertain times, I think is important. I firmly believe that whenever there's a changed environment, it's actually a new beginning, and new beginnings don't have the baggage of the past, of our past behaviors. And so whenever there's a dramatic shift, anything, you move to a new house, a new job, you actually have a very small window of time to start something right then, because there's no charted way for you. And unfortunately, what we do is we spend a lot of time trying to figure out the confusion of the time. And then by that time, we've already settled back into our old behaviors and our old routines. But really, to chart a path early on whenever there's change is a very powerful way to start new patterns and behaviors. So for me, I've thought of that many times. And every city I've lived in, I've tried to plan in advance, what are the schools? We didn't decide where to live. We needed the right schools around. We needed the right synagogues around. And I personally need a study hall, like a kollel, to be in the cities that we lived in. I even had my study partners already set before I ever met them, before I even moved to a new town. Because, the beginnings are opportunities. And so COVID, I just tell everyone I know, I'm like, this is new. You have a whole new world. You could do anything right now because everything else is out the door. So that for me has been a big change. But again, trying to stay consistent with what is important to you is key in terms of drawing that balance. And it's not easy, when my kids are banging on the door and legitimately I'm around and they don't understand how important could it be that you're just sitting in front of a computer screen and smiling to people, right? They don't understand that, but you have to be sensitive to it. Sorry, I don't know if that answers it.
It's a beautiful answer. I wanted to ask you, I know that you're running short on time. Just for a moment, Mike and I had the wonderful opportunity of speaking with a Holocaust survivor yesterday and getting her perspective on how she dealt with trying times and facing the future out of tragedy. And I would love for you, if you could possibly share a little bit. I mean, you guys are sort of retail in the Western Hemisphere, and I know that you have the big project in New Jersey that was just getting open, and you guys had to shut down the Mall of America, and dealing with all of this uncertainty. How is your family as people of faith, as people who have Emunah, like, how have you dealt with it? How has that affected your experience, and what advice could you give to someone who's similarly in a business that's so dramatically affected by the world that we live in today?
I'm not going to pretend that there's any easy answer to that question, because I can tell you how stressful it is for us, right? The bigger the industry, in the Talmud they say marbe nechasim marbe daiga, right? The more positions you have, the more you worry about it. So this has absolutely been probably the biggest challenge that we've ever had as a family. Now, what I can tell you is that what gives us the comfort is anyone who looks back at life will almost inevitably realize that everything that has happened, whether good or any pathway that has happened, is clearly the hand of God guiding the process. Because we live in the present, we're not cognizant of what happens in the past. And if you just look back a little bit, you'll realize that so much of where we are today is miraculous, and somehow we did survive and we made it through. I mean, the resilience of man is incredible, but because we only see the present, we don't realize how strong we are and how we can get through things. So I think just having a healthy inventory of the past, to think like, I've been through so much, and God has always been there. I think that's an important piece. I think family is important. A lot of support from family, and then this may not be understood properly, but really not giving up. And we have a concept in Judaism that says you have to make your efforts, right? Hishtadlut is that we don't believe that you can sit back and then God is just going to give you everything. But we forget the other side of the coin is that we have to do what's responsible. And putting up our hands and saying, well, I don't know what's going to be, that's also not what God wants. God wants us to be engaged. He wants us to make our effort. And then this is the key point, is once we've done everything that we can without being unreasonable or without going overboard, because then it's as if God's not in the picture. When a person genuinely believes that they're doing everything that they can, at that point in time, a person can say, you know what, God, I'm doing everything I can. Now you can bring your blessing and you can guide the rest of the pathway. And there's a comfort to know that it doesn't have to be your pathway. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to do your part. There's a lot to say about that, but I think again, the key idea is to be cognizant of the past, and that will help a person. Like, I just look at it. I talk to my wife all the time about it. I'm like, think about our lives until this point in time, and think about how incredible things have been. Like we work things out, a lot of challenges we've all been through, and just like look where we are today. I'm like, just let's fast forward 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I'm sure it'll work out. God has been there for us in the past. Again, it's too generic for me to say this for everyone. It's like, I don't want to be insensitive, because a lot of people are going, a lot of right now.
You're not being insensitive at all. In fact, this holiday I met, and in our community in La Jolla, San Diego, there are quite a few very prominent almost on a global scale Holocaust survivors. For whatever reason, maybe it's the nice temperate weather. They, at 90 years old, they're healthy, they're strong, Baruch Hashem, amazing people. But this woman we interviewed yesterday was different to almost every other one. She didn't have any macro philosophical thoughts. Like I said to her about the world and what do you teach your none of that stuff. She was just a downright pragmatic person. She says, I got through the Holocaust where you have no idea the evil that I witnessed, because I had hope. I said, hope for what? You normally say, I hope for. She says, I hope for a better day tomorrow. That's it. nothing else. And every time we pushed her, I hope for a better day tomorrow. We said to her, when your grandkids and your kids come to ask you for advice, what do you tell them? She said, never ask me for advice. I said, and then we decided it's because they just watch her. That's the advice, right? But she always said, when me and my husband, we never dwelled on the past, we never spoke about it to each other. There was too much emotional energy, and we had to start again. We had to move forward, and that was our decision. And she said, all I can tell people today is today's today, and you hope for a better tomorrow. That's it. Nothing else to tell you guys. No macro philosophy. It was phenomenal. No one's been that. She was just so pragmatic.
Wow.
Isn't that beautiful? And we say Modeh Ani in the morning. Thank you, God, for putting me back into another day, for putting my soul back in. I guess sometimes we just got to look forward to the Modeh Ani for tomorrow, right?
Wow. That's beautiful.
Well, John, I tremendously appreciate it. One of the last question that I try to ask our guests is, when we the name of our podcast is the Jewish Executive Project. I'm sorry, the Jewish Executive Project, and we want to, I guess, find out from you what is unique. What is it about being Jewish that impacts who you are as an executive? What do you think the unique thing that Jews are supposed to be doing as executives that other people don't necessarily have that same weight per se?
Wow. So just to rephrase the question, what about my Judaism would you say is the most informative in terms of how I show up to who I am in a professional sense?
Correct. That would be exactly right. What about being an observant Jew is practically affects your way you conduct yourself as a leader and executive?
Much better, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's better.
Okay, hold on. We got a little disturbance there. If I can answer that for my family, because I do believe I'm a family leader as much as a business leader, I'll tell you, with the chaotic nature of the world today, one thing that I tell my kids all the time, I think it's an incredible message to share, is I say, do you see how confused the world is? People don't know if they should love, they should hate. Nobody knows what they should be passionate about, what they should be angry about. And I always tell them, I'm like, we are so lucky. We are so blessed that we have the Torah, because it gives us a way to get through this. I'm like, could you imagine if we didn't have that? We would be one day running in the streets, like I think I would have been an animal rights activist for sure. Like I'd be like somewhere in Africa, not to say there's anything wrong with that, but like it's so hard to know where we should plug ourselves in because we're all so passionate by nature. I always tell my kids, know they're sick of hearing me say it. I'm like, whenever we talk about some chaotic world of people and choices, I always say how fortunate we are that we don't have to figure it out on our own. That's the first thing. On a business level, I think I touched upon it earlier. I think that if we, depending on the role and the position of a person, I think if we understood the responsibility of that role, whether it's lay leadership in the community, people are watching. People are watching to see what you do and how you do it. And we may not think so highly of ourselves because maybe we don't have that much that we should think so highly about. But I want you to know that people will inevitably look at you. Before I left Kollel and I was moving into the professional world, I asked my rabbi, I said, Rabbi, now I'm going to make my mark on the world. What would you say what should I do? Like, how can I make a big difference? And I love this. He told me, he says, just let people see that you're sitting and studying Torah in the mornings after Shacharit. Let people just see you there. Let people know that that's what you do. I'm like, what do you mean? I do that anyway. I'm like, that's it. Just live it. And that's going to have an impact on the people around you. So I would say that every one of us have people that look up to us in many different ways. Just assume that responsibility and know that the little things that we're doing, people are going to be watching us. And if you have the ability to say the same things that everyone else does, but from your vantage point, you're going to have an incredible opportunity to help guide people through this darkness. I think it's an incredible responsibility.
Amazing.
As always, it is such a pleasure to spend time with you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's wow, what a champ. Thank you so much.
And for me, a pleasure to meet you and spend time with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We appreciate your support. For more information or how to reach us, please follow us on social and reach out to jrupp@aish.edu.